I first wanted to start by diving into where we get data and how SparkToro works behind the scenes. We are a very uncomplicated application. SparkToro is challenging to build. Casey's done an incredible job. It would be a pain in the butt to replicate, but also it is true that it's a very straightforward service. So essentially what SparkToro is a giant database at the moment, about 78 million public social profiles that you can search in several ways, right? And those include, by words in a profile, right? In the whatever the bio section of Twitter, or the about section of your Facebook or your Instagram profile, or all those kinds of things, LinkedIn, right? And each of them pull data in slightly different ways, right? They're essentially pulling from that database of 78 million profiles. One thing to keep in mind, and this has been one of those challenges for folks who don't know, I started another company called Moz, which was in the search engine optimization space. And SparkToro has no data, zero data at all about what people search for in Google. So if you use SparkToro like an SEO tool, you're potentially going to have a bad time, right? We only know about public social and web profiles, right? Essentially, so you see here, I did a search for the word spirituality, and it's telling me SparkToro's database has 857,000 people that have talked about spirituality. What does that mean? That means essentially, if you go to whatever it is, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Reddit, YouTube, et cetera, and all the networks that we connect up to a profile, we have seen that 857,000 of those people posted publicly using the word spirituality or a stemmed version of that, right? Like spiritual. And they had to do it a few times. When we say frequently talks about, we don't mean they posted with it once, right? So if you happen to post about spirituality maybe one time, I don't know, on your LinkedIn page or something, that's not going to include you in this profile. You would have to do it multiple times. In the last approximately 120 days is about when our system looks for stuff. Oh, and it tends to be, I'll talk about that in a sec, but all the data comes from analyzing the profiles that use that word. If you do a hashtag search, my audience frequently uses the hashtag mindfulness. Again, same story. 104,000 profiles that posted publicly with the hashtag mindfulness, usually more than twice, probably 2 to 3 times. It depends on the hashtag exactly. Casey has kind of a system to figure out how frequently used is the word or hashtag or phrase overall, and then how many times should we count it, and how do we determine that a profile frequently talks about it. And it's pretty solid. Same thing here. When you go to the social tab, what you are looking at is not a fancy algorithm. There's no machine learning, no artificial intelligence. What we're saying is 14% of the profiles that we saw using the hashtag mindfulness engaged with or already follow mindful.org on one or more of the social channels that we've got for them, right? Twitter, their website, their Facebook page, their Instagram. That's all it means. 14% it's grade school division. Demographics is slightly different, because what we have to do with demographics is match enough profiles where we have data, primarily, a lot of the data that's inside demographics obviously comes from LinkedIn. So we have to have a LinkedIn connected profile for not every tab in here, but most of the tabs in here. And then we try and analyze, let's say for mindfulness, right? In this case, maybe only 10% of these do we actually have a LinkedIn matching profile with enough public data that is publicly, out there and crawlable and whatever. And so then that's where this data comes from. This is a sample of the subset. What's good about SparkToro's data is it works a lot like election polling, right? So if you followed elections in the United States or anywhere else, right, election pollsters are always trying to nail exactly the election by using small sample sizes. So, okay, let's see if Washington voters are going to vote for this new initiative. 47% support and 43% are against, and we have a sample size of 1,100 voters out of 3 million voters in Washington State. And still that sample size is usually plus or minus 2%, right? Even though it's a very tiny sample. Same thing in SparkToro. It's usually plus or minus a few percent, right? These are usually very representative of the broader audience and the entire world, right? If you analyzed every single person who posted with the hashtag mindfulness, they would probably be very similar to this. Today, our profile index is networks in order from most to least. Twitter is our largest network by a good shot. It is our connector network, meaning essentially we try and connect up all the other 9 and websites to a Twitter account. And if there is no Twitter account, we rarely have data about that service. That's becoming less true over time as we're trying to make some more networks into connector networks. I think we're looking at LinkedIn and probably Reddit for a lot of data in the future, YouTube as well. Instagram, maybe. Instagram's kind of a pain right now, but could be useful. What we don't want to do, the reason we're a little bit anti-Instagram biased is because we do not want to be perceived or in the world of influencer marketing tools. So we've shied away from Instagram a little bit. Regions, so it is almost exclusively English language profiles right now. And in generally in these orders of, we have the most profiles in these countries. So you will see US, UK, Canada, Australia. You can filter by location. I'll talk about that in a sec, but this gives you a nice sense of like, okay, here's what SparkToro's index mostly looks like, those 78 million public profiles. All right. For agencies and consultants, there's a few big things that you can do. The first one I'm going to talk about is winning those client pitches. Like I talked to a lot of agencies about exactly this, right? Essentially taking SparkToro's data into a client pitch. One of the first conversations I ever had about SparkToro at all was with Tara Hunt from Truly Inc., an agency up in Canada. And Tara was looking at the very first alpha version. We were at a conference together looking at the very first alpha version of SparkToro before it even had a UI. And she told us, if I had this data, I would never lose a client pitch. And I look, I don't know if that's true, but she's obviously built a heck of a practice there. In terms of what you can do with it, there's data that's very, very difficult to get. I have no idea, honestly, how you would be able to get this data without SparkToro. It's just a pain, right? So for example here, 1,062 people who follow Letterpress Distillery, which is, Letterpress Distilling is here in Seattle. They make a bunch of Amaro? I'm not sure, but the Italian aperitifs and cocktail mixers and a whole bunch of other stuff. They make whiskey and yada, yada, and they're friends of a friend. So if you wanted to know what podcasts are listened to by people who engage with and follow Letterpress Distilling, how would you figure that out without SparkToro? And being able to walk into a pitch, the CEO, the founder is this guy, Skip, and say, hey, Skip, did you know that these podcasts are listened to by your audience? And if you got on these podcasts, that would probably send you a bunch of customers who look like your existing customers and who would be aware of you. Maybe let's talk to the Whiskey Cast or Life Behind Bars or Bon Appetit's Healthyish. You can also dispel a lot of myths. I think there's, plenty of this stuff comes up in client pitches and those client meetings. Things like, well, Skip might say, I don't know that he would. Maybe he knows this stuff already, but our audience doesn't really keep up with the spirits world online. I bet they don't even pay attention to our competitors on social. Oh, really? Let's see if this is true. We can go in here and find, 1,000 people who have engaged with or followed Letterpress Distilling in the last 3-4 months. And we can look at people who follow Westland Whiskey, which is another Seattle-based distillery. And we can say, this statement is provably untrue, right? At least for the online audience of Letterpress, this is very much not the case. You can dispel myths about reach, right? and about who the audience is too. oh, I've been in so many meetings like this. I'm sure you have too, in-house as well as agency and consulting, where an executive, a CEO, a CMO, whoever you're pitching, right, will say, look, 95% of our customers are men. So we don't need to appeal to women, or they're in sales. We don't need to appeal to people in customer service, or they're in leadership roles. We don't need to appeal to people who are director level and below. That's just how it is. And, you can fight bias by saying, hey, I looked at 77,000 people who have used the hashtag craft beer online in the last 4 months. And I can tell you right now that a third of them or more are not men, right? That they are not just in sales. In fact, engineering and operations and marketing and design, they talk about things that maybe you did not realize that they talked about. They have attributes and behaviors that are very hard to know unless you have data behind it. And I really like fighting against stereotyping and bias with data. You can help your clients and potential clients see opportunities in other channels. You can even pitch them on channels that they might not have considered that you can help them with. Things like, hey, another agency comes in and we're like, hey, we're going to use media coverage to grow your brand, which is not a bad thing. But you can come in and say, we are going to use a marketing mix, right? Of exactly it's right here, the content, the social sources, the podcasts, the YouTube channels, the websites, the publications that reach high affinity target customers. You told us people who have these behaviors, whatever, they follow you online, they follow this competitor, they use this hashtag, they talk about these things, they have these behavioral qualities. We looked for those audiences in SparkToro, and it told us, here we go. You can reach in descending order through these websites, podcasts, channels, tactics. This is how to go about solving that marketing mix question, and we can help you do it. And this really makes the case for the kind of work that a lot of agencies and consultants do. So if you want to make this case, right, you get to use a data-driven approach that is very, very difficult for another agency or consultant or an in-house team to replicate without this data, right? To be able to say things like, oh, you're building whatever it is, we're doing a pre-roll campaign for YouTube. We have this great ad, it's a video, it's 15 seconds long, you have to watch the first 5 seconds, but we actually find that engagement across the whole thing is quite high, and we see a good click-through rate, and we see a good view-through rate. Fantastic. Which YouTube channels should we put into our targeting? Where do we want to appear and not appear? What's going to be relevant for us? And YouTube advertising might not be the way you're going, right? It could be, hey, we're going to pitch these folks on getting you on there as a guest, or we're going to pitch them to talk about you, or we're going to pitch them to advertise directly to them. We're going to talk to Master of Malt and see if they will feature us. And they have a $500 sponsorship, and we're going to do that. The second big piece is replacing some of the research that is very time intensive, usually for your team, with high quality data that is near instantaneous. I mean, if you've run SparkToro searches, you know that Casey's made it so that most searches are sub 5 seconds. A lot of them are even less than that. So it is just an incredibly fast process to iteratively discover kind of those right audiences and then get the data out of them. One of the biggest ways that I would recommend starting, if for example, I were running an agency or working in an agency and a potential client came to me, I would search for two things, right? I would start with their social handles and their website. And then, you can see data about who their audience is. So, I plugged in Westland Whiskey and I can see what words they have in their bio, which tells me there are a lot of people who follow Westland Whiskey in the spirits world online. Essentially, they are professionals. They are likely to be people who care deeply about it. You can see some other ones like aficionado and enthusiast and those sorts of adjectives, which suggest they're amateur, not professional, which is still great, right? But then you can see gender and age data, so you get this like demographic feel for who they are. You can get a sense for where they fall along the political spectrum even, right? In some cases, you may want to target your messaging or change messaging around that to be more or less inclusive, as is your clients want. You can tell them who their competitors are reaching that they're not. This is research that almost every quality agency that I've seen does this sort of competitive analysis, right? Here's your competition, here's who they're reaching, here's who you're reaching, here's what their audience looks like, here's what your audience looks like. Classically, a lot of this has been done with, I would say, very search-specific data, right? It's tools like Ahrefs and SEMrush and Moz. Maybe the more broader ones would be something like SimilarWeb, which has traffic data. But SparkToro can give you very different kinds of data about your online audience, right? So people who follow letterpress versus people who follow Westland, what are the differences? What are the similarities? And you can use the comparison feature, I'll talk about it in a sec, to do this. No, Westland Whiskey is not a sponsor. Skip is our friend, so I would generally bias you to go to letterpress. Westland, I took the tour, the Westland Distillery tour. It's nice. It's a lovely facility. I would highly recommend booking it for like an engagement or something. But if you want great cocktail mixers and spirits, I would go letterpress. Now the Westland Whiskey people are watching and they're just like, wow, did you? No, they're probably not watching. Find out. Where can you get traffic placement? So one of the biggest things that I find almost every digital agency does, and this is wise, right? This is a good thing to do, is try to figure out, hey, where can I go and find opportunities for placement, for advertising, for whatever, link building, for content placement, for getting traffic, getting a link, getting a mention. This is one of the things SparkToro is built for, right? You can essentially go find those things, look for people who talk about craft spirits. Okay, craft spirits, that's a strong overlap with the people who are interested in, small distilleries in places like Seattle and might be willing to talk about or cover. Even if you don't think this is your target audience, this is almost certainly your target media. This is your target people to reach who will write about you, cover you, amplify you, talk about you, share your content, talk about your brand, help you reach a broader audience. And you can go through here and say, oh, okay, yeah, this is exactly who I want to be reaching. And so I'm going to pitch them whatever my pitch is. There's also that discovery and new opportunity side of things, right? So this would be, I've written about the Wall Street, what I call the Wall Street Journal problem. So, classically, I've seen this plenty of times. I'm sure all of you have, especially if you've been in meetings with executives who think highly of themselves. They'll say stuff like, well, I go golfing with our customers every Sunday. I know they read the Wall Street Journal, so I want you to get us in the Wall Street Journal. And everyone in PR kind of knows that this is a prestige play. That the Wall Street Journal is not necessarily bringing the customers that the CEO or the company wants. That instead, this is about getting in the Wall Street Journal because they want the prestige of being mentioned there. Maybe they want the logo on their homepage. Will it actually move the needle on the business? Probably not. But you can now have these conversations, right? You can say things like, look, hey, we can definitely pitch the Wall Street Journal. It's a tough get. It's an expensive process, but we can charge you for that, and we can do that work. While we're at it, you might also consider some of this data. Did you know that Mac Cocktail and the drinks business and Food and Wine all reach more than 2 times the audience, the target audience you told us you want to reach, your customers and potential customers, than the Wall Street Journal? But that conversation just went from I have an opinion to I have data. I find that very powerful. YouTube channels, social profiles, podcasts, those are sort of the 3 most what I would call overlooked opportunities that many digital media and digital marketing investments just don't pay attention to yet. And I think this is one of the things, you know, that you sort of have in your toolkit to bring to these meetings, to be able to say, hey, you probably have not historically considered sort of targeting people based on the social profiles that they follow that are not classic influencers, right? You wouldn't find them in an influencer marketing platform. They are not sort of a, six-pack ab guy who takes off his shirt at beaches on Instagram. It is sources of influence rather than influencers. Podcasts and YouTube channels are the other two really big overlooked ones. Even websites are sometimes overlooked. A lot of folks throw a ton of money at Facebook and Google. They go after sort of a classic, maybe link building approach or a content marketing approach, but don't consider that next step of, hey, who's going to talk about me and amplify my brand? If you want to find even more detailed data, opportunities that almost no one else is likely to find, I recommend using the filters system. I'll talk through the filters a little bit more, but this hidden gems filter in particular is probably the easiest way to do that. That exists on both the social and the websites tab, maybe the press tab as well. And then you can essentially, what hidden gems is showing you as a filter is it filters from has a very large audience to has a smaller size of total audience, but has very high engagement in that audience. And SparkScore is essentially a measure of engagement. If you hover on there, you'll see exactly how we calculate it, or you can go to the SparkScore tool and you can see how we calculate that. But it is pretty good. Killer reports. So almost certainly, I think I saw a bunch of agencies who've actually built some very cool killer custom reports who joined this, and it's great to have you here. So this will be amateur hour for you folks, but on any page, right, in SparkToro, you can export a CSV, either from that particular tab, whatever, social, podcasts, et cetera, demographics, or you can export the full data for an entire report and get every single tab that's in our app into your CSV and put that in Excel. It's via that export data link. You'll get something like this. You can see all the different tabs down at the bottom, right? And then you can just select the data you want and sort of build out well, if I had been really sophisticated, I would have inverted the axis here. But, right, you can see, hey, let me select the ones I want to select from the data. I'll put the percentages in. I'll make I'm embarrassed to say this is about 90 seconds of work in Excel to do this. Just easy peasy, lemon squeezy. The value of this is both for client reporting, right? So you can say, hey, over every month that we've worked with you over the last 6 months, right, we sort of take this monthly snapshot of engagement and following online, and we look at, hey, here are these places, or it's just an initial pitch presentation report, because most of the top level data does not change all that much, right? So if you were to go back here and look at these top 20, top 30, maybe even top 50, depending on the sector, they rarely change over the course of 3 or 4 months, 6 months or a year, maybe more. But the bottom stuff really does shift around. I have a few that I'm monitoring because we're thinking about building an overtime reporting system, right? That sort of tracks and tells you all the new things that are going on. Thinking about building that for the future. All right, so easy, pretty charts. Last piece here before we get into some Q&A is I wanted to talk through some pro features that you might not be using. As Amanda mentioned, she's particularly excited about this. One of those is the filters. I showed this off a little bit, but each of these filters does something different, right? So hidden gems is sort of on or off. SparkScore, you can raise or lower that if you want to bring up the floor or bring down the ceiling. You can select a location. When you select a location in here, that is not modifying the audience, that is modifying these results. So for example, if you go, hey, I want to find everyone who talks about craft spirits and all the sources that they follow, and then I only want craft spirits sources of influence, right? The list here that you see, not the 77,000 people, that's not what you want to filter. If you want to filter these, Beer Advocate and Dogfish Brewing and Stone Brewing, you might be like, these are all over the country. I only want the ones that are in Washington State. You can do that here. That list will probably be smaller, right? The sources of influence, there's only usually a few dozen to a few hundred. So you might filter that to only a couple dozen that are in Washington State, but still you can do that. Same thing if you know you're going after only folks on their website and YouTube, you could select that. If you know that what you're trying to do is build audience targeting in Facebook's ad platform, because you're going to do Facebook and Instagram ads, you can just select Facebook and Instagram, and that'll show you only social accounts for which we have data on the Facebook and Instagram. You can change the account type from individuals to businesses. By default, popular accounts, globally popular accounts, meaning a lot of times it'll be like, everybody follows Barack Obama or Simone Biles or some famous person, Rihanna. She just became a billionaire. Amazing. So you can filter those in or out as well. Lists and contact information. Personally, I am very surprised at how few folks use lists. This is how SparkToro is designed, right? Basically, you go through, click, click, click. When something is on a list, it'll be highlighted pink here. So you can see I've added Beer Advocate to one of my lists in the past. If you hover, it'll show you which ones. And then once you have a list, you can export that and do whatever kind of outreach or pitching or media list building or ad list building you want. And we also provide contact information. So you can see here, I think for, what is this? Oh, from Scientific American, right? I clicked on that one and there's the email contact information comes from hunter.io. I think we looked at lists early on when we were building it, and our coverage, or hunter.io's coverage for email addresses, is about 70%. So it's usually about 7 out of 10 items that I add to a list where there'll be email contact. I don't always recommend emails the first step. I personally like LinkedIn and Twitter DMing for a lot of my outreach pitches, but I just find starting with social is a little easier. If a cold email is just not as well received. Also, compare profiles. So a lot of folks don't know that if you click that compare button, you can then put in 2 queries and you can see the overlap. This is a simple comparison. It basically just runs the 2 queries and then shows you what's the same and different between the results. Casey's actually, I think, working on a more sophisticated version of compare for the future. We'll probably have an update about that in the next, 6 to 12 months. But you can then see what I really like about this is you can say, hey, people who literally use the phrase craft cocktails is much, much smaller than people who literally use the phrase craft beer in their posts. And this gives you some sense of that. And then you can see data about those audiences, what's similar and different, where you might reach one and not the other, where you might reach both together. And that overlap, that is exportable to CSV as well. Just scroll down a little on the page. Ad location. So this one basically lets you say, I only want people who talk about craft beer and are located in Idaho, which is not a particularly populous state, but you can see here, here's what people who, here's the behavior of people in Idaho who've talked about craft beer online. Ad location will filter profiles a lot more than many folks expect. And this is because only approximately, I think this is old data, but probably still similar, only about a third of public social profiles across the 10 networks that we cover publicly state where they are located. So, something like 70%, 65% don't have a location at all. And so they won't be included. We don't try and get fancy and figure out where you might be, where you are. We will only use what you've put in your Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, Pinterest, whatever. If you've entered the location field and literally put something in there, that's what we use. So just an FYI. I can show you a little more in the demos too, if we're interested. Social profiles and hashtags. These are, in my opinion, very underutilized. Some of the best data that you can get from SparkToro is by plugging in a social account that people already follow. Like I said, Twitter tends to have the most coverage. You can use Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, a whole bunch of them. I'm recommending a little bit against Instagram right now. It does work for a good number of queries, but like I said, we're biasing a little bit against Instagram compared to the other ones. You can use YouTube, you can use Reddit, right? There's other stuff too. For you, those of you who might be skeptical about hashtags, like Amanda, I know you are. Yes, they're still huge on both LinkedIn and Twitter, not just Instagram. Hashtag usage is still massive and still hyper relevant. I myself have been surprised because I don't use hashtags all that much. I know we have SparkToro hours today, but turns out a ton of people who do cancer research use the hashtag cancer research. And if you look through there, you will see a whole bunch of usage. It is very indicative of people who have that interest.